Hi, I'm your host, Conor Byrne, and welcome to this episode of That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique stories. In today's episode, I meet Jon Goldstone, managing partner at the Brand Gym. I've been lucky to get to do some projects with Jon and find his calm, creative, and analytical approach a joy to work with. Jon is a fellow of the Marketing Society and has been awarded Marketing Week's Brand of the Year and the IPA Effectiveness Grand Prix. No mean feats. In our conversation today, Jon tells us about the amazing brands he has worked on, including Walker's Crisps, where he launched Walker's Sensations, remember those Posh spice ads? And also Hovis, where he rejuvenated the brand and created the brilliant Go On Lad ad. I'll forgive you if you pause now to Google them both. It's definitely worth taking a look. If you haven't had the opportunity to hear Jon speak about his career, his marketing beliefs, as well as his tips for you in your marketing career, well, you were in for a real treat from one of marketing's greats. Jon, thanks for joining me today on the That's What I Call Marketing podcast. I'd love to start just with a little bit of an introduction to you and your path to working where you are now at the Brand Gym.
Yeah, of course. I actually started off in research, really through not quite knowing what I wanted to do kind of out of university. So I worked for what's now Kantar. And actually really quickly, I realized it was the people that I was presenting to who were kind of on the client side in marketing jobs. That was the job I really wanted to do. And it's the first time I'd really seen something that I felt like I'd really enjoy and I'd be good at. So I joined Kraft actually initially in research and then moved over to the marketing side. And immediately I just loved it. I loved having a brand to look after, the freedom to kind of do, cool stuff. And Kraft was my kind of real kind of marketing university years, lots of really good courses. I worked on some great brands, had some great managers, felt like I kind of, learned marketing really. And then I had an opportunity to go out to Croatia, of all places, to work for Coca-Cola, to be the marketing manager, essentially for a completely new Coca-Cola business after the war in Croatia, which was just brilliant. So I had all of this kind of training, if you like, and suddenly I was applying it in this incredibly fast-moving kind of new market, which was awesome. I wasn't there that long actually, because we had our second child, which brought us back to the UK, and joined PepsiCo, which I just loved. I was there for best part of 10 years. Did some really cool kind of interesting stuff. So I launched the big bags of Doritos for the first time in the UK. I launched Walker's Sensations as a completely new sort of brand launch. Launched Nobby's Nuts. I relaunched Walker's Crisps with healthier oils and less salt and all that kind of stuff. So just had an absolute kind of ball. Then decided to do something quite different. So joined a company called Premier Foods, big food company in the UK, one of the biggest. And it was an opportunity to turn around their biggest brand, which was Hovis, which I, again, loved. Had complete kind of freedom to pick a new agency, recruit a new team, effectively kind of invest what was needed to turn the brand around, because it was their biggest brand by far, and they needed to kind of prove as a business that they could grow brands organically rather than just through acquisition. So I did the Hovis job for a while. I was promoted up to CMO at Premier Foods. Then took an opportunity to move to Unilever. So I became the marketing VP for their food and refreshment. It's like ice cream business effectively in the UK, which was amazing portfolio of brands. If you think about, Ben & Jerry's, Magnum, PG Tips, Marmite, Pot Noodle, Hellmann's mayonnaise, Knorr, really attracted me, the brands. And then moved within Unilever into my first kind of proper global role, really, working on the spreads business. And that really led up to the disposal of the spreads business to private equity. It was bought by KKR about 6 years ago. And that was my opportunity to do something I've been thinking about for ages, which was to essentially become a brand consultant or a brand coach, as we say at the Brand Gym. So I'd known David, who was the founder of the Brand Gym, founded 20 years ago, in fact, for a while. And we'd kind of had a couple of conversations, but that was our opportunity to have kind of serious conversation. And yeah, that was 5 years ago now, 5.5 years ago. So thoroughly enjoyed it. And I've loved getting back to kind of pure marketing. I mean, it's, I've always said it's as much a hobby as it is a career for me. I just love brands. I love growing brands. I love the people that work on brands. I love seeing them prosper. And I think, as my corporate roles, if you like, got bigger, I just spent less and less time doing marketing. Seems kind of strange. And that's what I love about it. So the variety of categories, the variety of brands, the variety of countries I work in, the great people I get to work with. In lots of ways, I kind of wish that I'd done it sooner, if I'm honest. But hopefully that gives you a sense of from market research to brand consultancy over whatever that was, 30-year period.
And one of the things, like as you talk about the brands you've worked for, you mentioned that you loved them a lot, like each of them. Was there something about the companies or the brands that you were going to work for when you were making those decisions that was part that you just would love to work there or love that particular brand? Was that kind of part of the story?
Yeah, I think without ever really sitting down and thinking about it, I've always gone to work for companies where there's brands that I've had an affinity with, and I've felt like I could do something good with them. So, for example, when I joined PepsiCo, the person that was interviewing me couldn't believe quite how excited I was about Doritos tangy cheese. It's like literally my favorite snack. It still is today. I can scoff my way through a whole kind of big bag if I'm not careful. And they were like, I've never met anybody who's as passionate about tangy cheese Doritos as you. And I was like, you've got to give me this job. It's like literally my dream kind of brand to work on. But it's the same. And there's also, I think as I've sort of got a bit older, I've realized that I've got a knack really for turning brands around that were once famous and have lost a little bit of their gloss. So right back at Kraft, I worked on Toblerone, which at the time was kind of famous brand, but it barely sold anything. And I thought, wow, I could really have some fun here. And then the same with Hovis, actually. It was the real attraction of joining Premier Foods. I just, thought of, that amazing kind of famous Boy on the Bike ad from the 1970s. And the affinity I had, it was the brand that we had as a family when I was a kid. And I just thought, it's so sad that this brand's kind of on such hard times and it looks awful in store and the bread's poor quality and the advertising's crap. And I just thought, I can really do something to improve the fortunes of this brand. And the same with Unilever, actually. Brands like Marmite and Pot Noodle, such famous kind of brands, but again had been traded, a bit neglected. And I just thought, wow, I could really do something here. So yeah, it's definitely important to me. I think they often say, don't they, when you're looking for new jobs, make sure you've got a kind of a line manager that you can really imagine kind of doing great things with. I think for me, my version of that is just make sure it's a brand that you can imagine you really getting stuck into and doing something really good with.
Where a lot of them in decline might be the wrong word, but where a lot of them kind of on that path of they were great and had that potential to come back again. Is that part of the appeal for you? Is that turnaround?
Yeah, I think so. And it is one of those things that I've sort of considered retrospectively rather than necessarily at the time. Right. But that seems to be the sort of the connecting piece between all of the brands that I've most enjoyed working on, and secondly, that I've been most successful with. I mean, there's been a couple of brands where I've gone charging in thinking that I can do amazing things, and they're basically dead. There's no reviving them. So at Unilever, there's a brand called Stork. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah. Famous really in the 1950s and 60s as a baking brand. Yeah. And I was thinking, wow, there's this big interest in baking because of British Bake Off and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of swept around the world. And Stork actually was designed to give cakes a little bit more lift than butter. So I had like a product truth that I could really play with. And I thought this is going to be like a global mega brand before we knew it. And of course, that was ridiculously naive. You know, it's a kind of crappy, slightly beaten up brand that's heyday was in the 1960s. And there was no chance of ever really properly bringing it back to life. So it doesn't always work.
Always work. Yeah. I think we actually have some stork in our fridge, would you believe? And
there you go.
I'll give you credit for that.
It gives you 30% more lift in a cake than butter. There you go.
That's so stork fact.
Has less saturated fat, so more bigger bubbles essentially in a cake.
Well, definitely anything I bake needs all the help it can get.
Yeah, there you go.
And so obviously now with the brand gym for the last 5, coming on 6 years, I think.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about the work for somebody who's listening who doesn't know the work that the brand gym does?
Yeah, so there's essentially kind of 3 kind of core offerings that we have. So the types of project that we work on. The first of those is classic kind of brand purpose, brand positioning work. The second of those is essentially kind of core brand growth. So we'll often go into businesses and we'll kind of turbocharge their marketing plans. We wrote a book called Grow the Core, and it was all about the importance of focusing on your kind of core brand assets, driving growth there. Often gives you a better return than innovating. Having said that, then the third offering is around brand stretch. And if you are going to innovate or kind of stretch your brand into new spaces, the importance of doing that in a truly kind of brand led way that obviously links into your positioning and also is complementary to what you're doing on your core. So that's the type of work we do. It tends to be with, all sorts of businesses. So I've had the pleasure of working with you at Indeed, Conor. I work on some quite big businesses like Philips, for example, around the world. I've worked with, but I've also worked with some much smaller businesses. So, for example, I work with a restaurant chain based in San Diego who specialise in fish tacos.
Wow.
Which was a great project because I spent quite a lot of time in San Diego eating fish tacos. So that was good. So yeah, all sorts of categories, all sorts of companies, and pretty much around the world. So I did a project in Pakistan quite recently as well. So really keeps me interested. Just as much as anything, just the variety is fantastic.
Yeah, that it is. It is a great thing to have that kind of just. When I worked in agencies, it was one of the things I did love about being in an agency is like every day you'd be working on potentially 2 or 3 different clients' work, and it was just that complete, from financial services to gambling, right? Like, although people do make comparisons between the two since the crash here, but it's it is really fascinating just to kind of get that opportunity. When you were talking about the areas of I guess focus for the brand gym, and you talked about that brand stretch, and you kind of touched on it, but I'm interested to hear more about how that brand stretch works that allows you to stay close to the core. Because I've been fascinated in that kind of the stretch outside the core.
Yeah, I think, it dates back a little bit now, but I think Walker's Sensations, which I mentioned earlier, is probably the biggest success of my career, actually, because it was just so successful. It went from, zero, obviously, to selling about £100 million worth of retail sales within a 2-year period. And the total Walker's business at the time was, I think, about 400 or 500 million. So, it really was transformational for that business at the time. And I think what that did really well is it was based upon exactly the same proposition as the core Walker's Crisps brand, which was around essentially irresistibility. So, these crisps are so good, you would do anything for them. And that was best articulated through the Gary Lineker advertising, which was even this nice guy footballer that's never been sent off in his career will steal your crisps because they're so delicious. That's so irresistible. So it sort of worked off that central kind of proposition of irresistibility. And it also, from the core Walker's brand, it took some really important attributes like amazing quality. I mean, the awareness that the Walker's brand had, so it benefited from that because we used the Walker's kind of main brand and then Sensations as a sub brand. So there was, it took, if you like, which was important, but it also gave back to the main Walker's brand. So, Walker's, for example, a key sort of image attribute is all around, best quality in market, and actually Sensations upped the quality offering. So it really helped the master brand, if you like, on its kind of quality credentials. It was a sharing proposition rather than just a for me proposition. So it introduced an element of sharing into Walker's as well. So for me, it was the reason it was so successful is it was kind of true to the core master brand, but it also gave some really new, interesting things back. I think the other, and it gets a little bit tactical, but I think it's so important, is one of the other key success factors of Sensations, and I see it all the time, is that it was more profitable than the core Walker's brand from day one. So it was basically relatively, cheap to make, but we could charge quite a significant premium for it. And therefore the margin we made was that much higher. And it meant that when the sales guys are out there selling it, they were highly incentivized to do it because it really helped their numbers. It also gave us a little bit of room in the P&L to offer the trade customers a bit more margin than perhaps they were used to with innovation. So, I think, when you look back at those big successes, that there's a brand element and the importance of kind of grounding it in your core brand values and all of that great stuff. But there's normally quite a heavy dose of quite practical kind of businessy stuff that will either make it a success or not.
Was Walker Sensation competing with other brands that were doing something similar in terms of that kind of higher end crisp, or was it kind of creating almost a new category within crisps at the time? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was really interesting actually. So it was around about sort of 2000, so 20 years ago now. But the market at the time was sort of sharing snacking market. It was defined by Pringles and Kettle. And essentially Pringles was a kind of party brand. If it was the World Cup or if it was Christmas or if it was a kids party or something, that would be the brand that you would have in the house to share. And Kettle was the kind of the grown-up brand that you took around to your neighbours if they asked you around for drinks type thing. It was that kind of, says something like I'm a slightly more discerning kind of crisps buyer. But actually, the really interesting little nugget of insight that kind of unlocked the opportunity is that when we spoke to Walker's buyers, so that's the mainstream buyers, high penetration brand who were mainly eating Walker's in the day with a sandwich. And we basically asked them, do they buy Kettle? The duplication was almost zero, almost no Walker's buyers, even though there's a huge number of them bought Kettle. And when you dug under it, they quite liked the idea of a kind of a posher crisp for kind of to eat in the evening with a glass of wine. But for them, Kettle was it was too greasy, it was too hard, it was too expensive, it was too Southern English and sort of, put your little finger in the air when you drink your cup of tea, sort of, posh. And that was really where the inspiration came from, which was, wow, there's a bunch of people here that would readily buy a premium crisp in the evening, but Kettle's just not doing it for them. So that was the brief, was basically to create a product that was a little bit less crunchy, wasn't greasy, had kind of posh flavors, but nothing too kind of, weird or wonderful, was, premium priced, but not crazily expensive. And that was it was a very simple kind of idea really, but it was incredibly powerful. And of course we used, Victoria Beckham to advertise it right from the beginning. And we very proudly called them Posh Crisps from Walker's and she's Posh Spice. And it was just one of those things that it came together so well. And it just took off from day one. It was fabulously exciting. I mean, it really was.
I was trying to remember the ads. As you were talking, I was like, what ad? Because I knew, I recalled them being on TV and out there. So, even over here, but that's so clever. And you talked about their kind of the insight, how important has it been throughout your career and through kind of the successes you've had, even now with the brand gym and working with clients, is that speaking to customers, speaking to clients to kind of unlock growth? What sort of role does insight to unlock growth play in what you're doing?
Yeah, I again, you sort of analyze yourself a little bit over time and figure out, what goes on in your head. But I've sort of realized that the sort of research side of me, and I enjoyed my kind of research work. I do have an analytical side, and I really love data and numbers and research. And I'm really curious and interested. And, if you give me a pile of, and often my clients do, 30 or 40 documents, a couple 100,000 pages of research or analysis. Honestly, I can spend 2 or 3 days just noodling through that. I see the connecting points and the patterns and the trends, and slowly out of that ideas emerge. So I really like the analytical side. But at the same time, I'm creative in that I like creative things. Yeah. So I love music and film and art, and so I'm sort of creative in that way. But I don't paint or I don't play an instrument, or so, you know what I mean? So I appreciate creative stuff when I see it, yeah. But I'm also kind of analytical, and I think it's those two things that have made me, pretty successful marketeer. That ability to be quite analytical, but at the same time really appreciate the kind of the creative side of marketing as a discipline.
And I was actually, because I was going to get onto some of your marketing beliefs. We've touched on some of those, but actually one of the ones I was interested to hear your point of view on kind of the debate of like the science versus the creativity. Is marketing a science? Is it a creative art? It's both.
I totally think it is. The sort of the discipline kind of evolves over time, doesn't it? But I think central to being a good marketeer, you've got to be comfortable both, engaging your sort of analytical, kind of cool, unemotional kind of left brain, but you've also got to be able to engage the creative, go off wherever you want to, kind of, exploration that you can do with your right brain. So that sort of whole brain marketing, I think, is really critical, as critical today as it ever has been.
Better way of putting it, whole brain marketing. I like that. And it's do you find you have to compartmentalize, go right, today is analytical, tomorrow I'll get into the creative side, or can you flip between the two?
I think I do. I think as a consultant, I one of the things I miss is the interaction with creative agencies effectively. So I've always loved having that relationship with particularly the advertising agency, but also, you meet creative people in all sorts of other agency environments as well. So, I if I'm not careful, I get really kind of stuck in the data because I enjoy it so much, yeah. and making those kind of little creative leaps. Sometimes I neglect that a little bit, and I have to kind of think, no, my job isn't just to do the analysis bit. It really is to make those kind of creative jumps. So that's because you don't have that extra kind of resource around you, yeah. to kind of assist you in doing that. And I think that's probably where I'm at. Yeah. Yeah. You have to kind of go. It's interesting. I find we have a lot of meetings that may not be at the, a good time zone. So people record them and send them. And I find myself more drawn to watch a meeting that's a creative presentation than anything else. It's just, because I think you do need, you need that spark when you're not getting it. Are there other kind of marketing beliefs that you've had through your career that you really kind of hold firm, non-negotiable things for you that you really, believe need to be kind of followed? Yeah, I think Number one is be remarkable. Years ago when I was at PepsiCo, I had the pleasure of meeting Seth Godin. He came in and it just published Purple Cow, actually, and came in and presented it to a kind of bunch of people. And it just really struck with me, that really simple kind of story that he tells in that book of driving past, fields and fields of cows with a friend, and they don't even notice them, and you go past the field with one purple cow, and it's like, fuck me, it's a purple cow. and then obviously that's how most of it's experienced advertising. You can go days and days and you'll be bombarded with hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of messages, and just occasionally you see something that is remarkable in the truest sense, which is you will remark upon it. You will say to a family member or a friend, I've seen that thing, isn't it amazing? Or, wow, isn't that clever? Or it really reminded me that I should go and buy such and such. And I've really, really tried to stay true to that throughout my career. So only put stuff out there, whether it's a piece of innovation or a piece of advertising or a new packaging design or whatever, that is truly remarkable. I hate average. So that's kind of really guided me through most of my career. I think the second thing is that I hate sort of self-indulgent stuff. I really see marketing as a function that should allow a brand to sell more stuff. We talk about SMS at Brand Gym. So I'm a commercial marketer. I always used to obsess over daily sales when in my marketing jobs. Every morning you'd get the ping on your phone, and are we on forecast? Are we growing? Are we getting any share when the share reports come in? I really stay true to that kind of sell more stuff piece. There's definitely some point 3 around. It's a bit Byron Sharpie, but brands grow by attracting new buyers. So penetration-led growth. I've literally always been guided through that in my career on that. I remember my first brand was Toblerone, as I mentioned, and it had like 7% penetration. And I remember talking to the media agency when I first met them, and they were like, God, this media is brilliantly targeted. We'll target all of the kind of Toblerone users. And I'm like, surely we should be trying to get to more people to buy the brand. And they were like, oh, no, it's all about loyalty and turning it into a love mark. And I was seriously, obviously it was way before how brands grow and stuff. Yeah. I've always felt just my job is to get more and more people, trying a brand. So that was number 3. Number 4 is just a sense of the best brands are always doing stuff. I hate brands that kind of, rock up every 6 months and say, no. And so I've always, that principle of kind of always being out there doing something, always being active, always sort of having a something to communicate to the consumer has always been important to me. And then the final kind of sort of belief is hard learned, really, which is I think marketing is very much a team sport. And, I think at early part of my career, I was, doing my thing, but I was guilty of not taking kind of other people with me. And when I learned that lesson, the stuff that, I was able to do with others on a brand was brilliant. It was way better than anything I'd ever done as a sort of a lone wolf, if you like.
Yeah, because actually, as you talked through some of the roles you've had, it sounded like you were very in sync with like the product, with sales. Like you weren't just kind of doing the marketing piece. It was you were heavily involved with everything, or there was a team involved. So obviously that did form kind of a team for you through your career so far.
Yeah, I think Hovis is probably the best example of where everything kind of came together. So I'd had a amazing run at PepsiCo. I really loved it. But then I had the opportunity just to focus on this one amazing brand. And I was, as a marketeer, just as you were saying there, I was given the responsibility to look at everything that was going on. And it was a brand that was in terrible health. It was losing share kind of month on month, losing sales, just terrible. And actually, the big thing that needed to change right from the beginning was the quality of the product,
Right.
because we would just, it was rubbish quality bread versus the competition. And then just organizational belief.
Right.
There were 4,000 people employed on the brand at that time, because there were 11 mills that milled, the flour. There were 8 bakeries around the country that baked the bread. There was a huge army of drivers that delivered the bread literally once a day, every morning to store, and then a head office team. And everybody just got used to losing, essentially. So it was really before I even thought about traditional marketing in terms of, how we're going to position this, what's the packaging going to be like, what's the advertising going to be like. There was some really fundamental stuff, like just make sure the quality is worthy of advertising.
Right. Yeah.
And make sure that everybody involved in this just believes that it has the potential to be great again. So for some people that might go beyond the realms of a kind of traditional kind of marketing job, if you like. But I've always felt that, essentially the marketer, you're the growth person. You're responsible for growth. And, I try and look as widely as I possibly can when I work on a brand. And often the most important growth lever it isn't what you would consider to be the kind of traditional marketing.
Yeah. And also I think, if the product's not good, it's really hard. Like, can't put lipstick on a pig, it just doesn't, you can do advertising all you want or whatever marketing, but if the product's bad, people might experience it once and not come back to it. And we are on Hovis, and I would love to ask you about the very famous Hovis Go On Lad campaign that, obviously you got the product right, people were starting to believe in the brand, and then you created this incredible piece of advertising. Can you talk to me a bit about how that kind of came about and some of the successes that brought for the company?
Yeah. Again, I mean, that's, after the Sensations launch, that's probably, second most, proud piece of marketing I've ever done. It's terrible English, sorry. But, so that was really interesting. So I went into Hovis. The bottom was kind of dropping out of the business. Worked, with my team and the broader kind of leadership team to, get the quality good, which was super important, and just to try and instill a bit of belief into the business. So I actually joined in the March of 2008, just to give you an idea of time. And we said, right, we're going to give ourselves 6 months until September. And in September, we're going to relaunch this brand, all guns blazing. So it was no time at all really to fix the quality problem, to, do everything that needed to be done. So a couple of months into that 6 month period, I started thinking about advertising, essentially. So we'd kind of got this idea from a positioning point of view that on the market map, there were really 2 axes. There was sort of a real bread axis. So you had kind of, artificial bread at the bottom and like really freshly baked bread at the top, and then sort of real baker's attributes. So you had sort of manufacturers, if you like, on one end, and then kind of real bakers at the other end with like, the aprons and the hats and flour. And and the top right quadrant was where we wanted to be, which was real bread from real bakers. That was the proposition. But essentially, Warburton's in the UK had stolen that market position from Hovis. So it was essentially, right, we're going to leapfrog back over Warburton's, and we're going to steal that kind of high ground of being real bread from real bakers. That's the job, and we got everybody lined up to that job. So we'd had an ad agency, and I sort of went to see them. And to be honest, the response was really underwhelming. So I thought I just need somebody to work on this that's going to care. And I met the guys at what was called MCBD at the time, the advertising agency. They've since evolved into being Lucky Generals.
All right, okay.
So it's an amazing team of 3. So Helen Calcraft, Andy Nairns, planner, and then Danny Brooke-Taylor, who's the creative. And I met the 3 of them, and honestly, I was totally blown away. It was brilliant. So I sort of explained to them what I was trying to do, and they were sort of I mean, they were outraged at how such a once famous brand had ended up in such a awful position, and they wanted to put it right, and they took it really personally. I love that. It was just like, no, we're with you. This is so important. We can't let a brand like this fail. So, to be honest, the brief, I didn't show them a single slide. I just talked to them, and I drew a couple of kind of, maps out on bits of paper and so on. Gave them a book, which was like the history of the brand that somebody had done a couple of years before. And then I remember going into their agency, and Danny did the presentation. The other guys were there, and there were a couple of creatives that had worked with Danny. And he was like, just imagine a young lad leaves home to go and collect a loaf of bread for his mum, and he runs back through 122 years of history. And honestly, I've got goosebumps now, just sort of remembering it. But that was it. It was kind of pretty much a Post-it note, sort of pitch. And I was like, absolutely, I can see it. I can totally see it. And obviously, the 122 years was the length of time the brand had been around for, and it evolved into an amazing advert, which was 122 seconds long, the long form. So a second for every year the brand had been around for. And I just love working on it. I mean, it came with some real challenges. So the budget, the production budget was over £1 million. And the most that Premier Foods had ever spent on producing an ad was £200,000. So that was essentially the budget I was working within. So I just remember thinking, this is literally going to cost 5 times more than we've ever spent on making an ad before. So I sort of tested out basically the promise that had been given to me when I joined the company, which was, we'll give you whatever you need to make this successful. And it was definitely some difficult conversations with like the procurement team and so on. But we really went for it. And to be honest, if I hadn't got it signed off, I would have left the business. It was that important to me to do it well, and to do it right. And I was so confident that the idea was so good that it would help to transform the fortunes of the brand. And really, my job was to secure the funding, and then the agency team did together with amazing director who very sadly died quite recently, actually quite young. But yeah, it just turned out to be just so brilliant. I remember when I first saw the rough cut before it was, graded or it had music over it and everything. I just thought, this is so good. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. So yeah, it was voted by ITV viewers the ad of the decade within the decade that we launched it within. So really, really, really proud of that. And I mean, linking back to my belief around, marketing should sell more stuff, that really was, I mean, literally the rate of sale increased the day after it first went on air. I mean, we would get EPOS reports through from Tesco or whatever, and literally, more people bought our bread the day after it went on air. I mean, it was because bread's it's a daily purchase habit. It's got 95% penetration. So if you do something right, it has a pretty immediate impact. And
tied to your belief, it's remarkable as well. People
definitely
on it.
Definitely. What I love with the bit I missed out of the story is that we got talking about. So I'd done some research with Hovis buyers just to try and get a sense of what people thought of the brand. It was literally the first thing I did, like the first week I was there, and all people could talk about was the Boy on the Bike advert, which was made by Ridley Scott in 1973, and everyone was like, just remake that, do a new version of that. That's all you need to do if you're going to be successful. And so there was no memory, no memory structure, again, using Byron's sharp language, other than that one advert that was, 40 years old by the time I rocked up. And what the MCBD team said was, let's make something better. let's not be, intimidated by the past. Let's make the next great Hovis ad. Let's make one that's even better than that's been made before. And I really think they did, which was fabulous.
It also felt like it belonged to that ad, if you know what I mean. Like, it didn't feel like it was a massive departure from that, and like it felt like it was part of that story almost. Like you could see,
exactly,
two almost live together, which is and it's actually something that. Sorry, on that ad, one last thing. When we did a bit of work together a few years ago, and I sent that ad to everybody that was going to be working with you, going, "This is who we're working with." So I was like, my fanboy moment. But one of the things I know the brand Jim talked about as well is the concept of fresh consistency. So something that we see a lot of marketing is people coming in and saying, change everything, right? Like, new CMO, we change everything. So that, I guess, the few examples of kind of seeing that in some of the brands you're working with and where that kind of really adds value.
Yeah, I mean, the campaigns that I most admire are the ones that, have a really, really strong, creative idea at their heart. And, they go on and on, but they stay just as fresh and relevant as they did from day one. So, actually, is another reason I was attracted to join PepsiCo, because I love the Walker's campaign. So, the first Gary Lineker commercial was when he retired from football, and he'd been playing in Japan, and he came back, and he was a Leicester lad, and Walker's is a Leicester brand, and he was this kind of nice guy that had never been sent off. So there was an advert that was made, I think it was 1994, the first one. And that ran all the way through to a couple of years ago, so like 25 years. And essentially the same idea, which is these crisps are so irresistible that even that nice guy, Gary, will try and pinch them. I mean, that was like a formula that ran for 25 years. But it was always kept really fresh and really relevant through the context or through the other character that Gary bounced off or whatever. Equally so, Guinness, for example. I mean, I always loved that sort of really clear creative idea, quite kind of epic in its ambitions. And the way that, Good Things Wait has evolved into there might have been 2 or 3 since, but into their kind of latest idea. It seems grounded in a really clear product truth. There's a sort of a freshness to everything, but a real consistency that runs through the brand. So I really like that. And actually, probably the best example that I've worked on is Marmite, and I think you probably know the famous sort of love it or hate it campaign. But I started working on that with Adam and Eve, with the agency, when I first joined Unilever. And it had been running for a long time, but it definitely lost its freshness. It was starting to get a bit repetitive and a bit stale. And again, I mean, just worked with brilliant agency people. And we had a real kind of issue at the time where people were buying Marmite but not using it. It was getting kind of left in the back of the cupboard, and people were trying other things instead. So we developed this idea called Marmite Neglect, and the idea was, love it, hate it, just don't forget it, and it breathed completely new life into a really famous, lovely, long running campaign with a really strong brand idea at its heart and linked into a brand truth. So for me, the best thing I could do with that campaign was to keep it going and breathe freshness into it, rather than, as you say, to rip it all up and do something completely new, which is often the instinct of marketers when they first go into work on a brand.
Yeah, it takes a real kind of beat or a pause to go, okay, actually, what should we do? Versus it's not working, and when, as you say, you're responsible for growth, it can be a lot of pressure. So there is kind of a bravery involved, I think, in being able to stop and say, okay, hang on, how can we how can we refresh this? I know kind of on the Brand Gym blog, there was a post about James Bond being a good example of that as well, breathing kind of freshness into a franchise. We touched on it earlier on, failures and learnings. Are there any kind of big failures and learnings that they've brought to you in your work so far?
Yeah, I think there were sort of two that sprung to mind, actually. The first of those is running with things that intuitively I knew weren't going to work too long, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think at heart, I'm a bit of a kind of a people pleaser. I'm not that great with kind of confrontation, and I've got, better as I've got kind of older. But I remember back in my PepsiCo day, there were two particularly pieces of advertising that I worked on. And honestly, they ran this kind of project. And hey, I was responsible. And right from the beginning, I was like, this isn't going to work. This is such a rubbish idea. And yet I got sort of swept along with the momentum. I remember one was Walkers, and we were trying to move the Gary campaign on a bit, links into our kind of fresh consistency conversation. And somebody had come up with this sort of technical kind of approach, which was, we were talking about how Walkers is made from real potatoes, and real potatoes are obviously sliced, and we were trying to get that whole sense of kind of realness back in. And it was possible to film like a scene, so that the scene had like 10 different slices in it, if you could imagine, like it was a slice of potato.
Yeah.
And in each slice, the action was moving slightly differently.
Right.
I think it's been used in some movies and stuff in the past, but less ambitiously. And I remember being sold upon this idea, but really thinking, I've no idea how they would do this or whether it's going to turn out any good. And we spent hundreds of thousands of pounds trying to do this thing and honestly, the first time it was shown to me, it was just awful. I mean, it was really, really rubbish. And even at that point, we didn't pull the plug. I didn't pull the plug. I was like, come on, it's salvageable, And I think that just, not being, as you talked about braveness a few minutes ago, but not being brave enough when all of my instincts were saying this is not going to work, just to back my judgment and my instincts. There was a really similar thing. We launched a thing called Quaker's Seasons, and there was a piece of advertising. I won't go through the whole thing, but right from the beginning, I didn't like the script particularly, but the other people working on the brand were like, yeah, this would work. And I was like, God, I wish we'd just binned it, right early on. So that was kind of the number one sort of area of where there has been failures, where I've just let stuff run too long. I think the other thing is, I talked about it a little bit before. I think I was quite a kind of a sort of lone wolf marketeer for quite a while, bit of a one-man band. I was kind of happiest when it was just me, if I was really honest. And I remember really being called up upon it when I was at PepsiCo. So I was kind of early 30s, I suppose. So I'd been at it for like a decade by then, I suppose. And I had a team, and the business was going unbelievably well. And I thought, I'm on for like the best rating ever here, big bonus and all that kind of stuff. And I got massively pinged down on my rating and didn't get any kind of bonus, because my team had done like these 360 feedback surveys, and they'd basically all said that I was just a dick, and that it was all about me, and I did all the presentations, the sales team, I took the credit for everything, and it was really hard feedback at the time. I was pissed off at the time. But honestly, I listened. I got a kind of personal coaching, and I just transformed the way that I thought about leading. To be honest, and I'd never really been trained in that stuff, And I'd just come out of a bonkers time when I'd been working in Croatia of all places, which is like the Wild West, So I'd picked up some really bad habits as well. So I think that was my other failure, really, not to see the power of taking others with you, empowering others to do great things, and that whole kind of transition from it's all about me kind of, childhood state into it's kind of all about us kind of adult state. And I think all marketeers go through that transition, and I've really helped people, coach people through that transition in later years. But I found that really hard to do, and that's probably, when I look back, my kind of biggest failure is more of a kind of a leadership failure rather than a sort of, if you like, marketing sort of discipline failure.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Something not hugely dissimilar, but somebody on my team once said to me, after I don't know how long working together and doing one-to-ones, and they just said, you've never asked me how my weekend was. And it was just, and I'm interested in people, I'm curious, but I, for some reason, had this wall up almost that I was like business-like. Again, in that early stages, you kind of feel a persona almost, because I felt I was probably faking it a bit, right? And so I felt and it was really impactful. It's still with me today. And I think, as you say, it's hard to hear those things, but the difference it makes. So it's kind of, I'll always appreciate that person for that thing. But I think it's great, because then, as you say, you can bring people with you, right? Because there's a different dynamic, different perspective. And
it's true. And it's a cliche, but feedback, I mean, really is a gift. And whenever people now ask me for feedback, I really think about it. I really want it to be considered, and I really want to help others, because that's probably the most helpful feedback I've ever had, and was quite transformational in the way my sort of career progressed, from that point.
And I know you did it for me after we worked on a project together. I asked you for feedback, and you kindly did take the time to consider it. And it was really just, it's great to get that again from kind of a perspective. So thanks for that. I'm conscious of our time. I want to get through a couple more things, but you've worked with a ton of people, a ton of brands. Is there anybody you're kind of going, oh my gosh, I would love to be able to work with that person or that brand?
I was talking earlier about how lucky I've been to work for like amazing people in the industry. And honestly, I have been so lucky, right back to when I was at Walker's working with AMV. There was an amazing planner there called Bridget Angia. There was a fantastic creative guy called Peter Suter. I then had, that brilliant team that I mentioned that worked on Hovis, who I'm still in touch with today. And, I just think they're brilliant people. Actually, when I worked on Marmite and Pot Noodle with, actually it was just Marmite and Coleman's, it was actually, with Adam and Eve, DDB, I had the pleasure of working with James Murphy and David Golding, who'd founded Adam and Eve. And so I feel like I've worked with like the good and the great in the advertising industry, and I've really loved those relationships. I'm sure there's people that I've not met along the way and not worked with that I would have enjoyed, but I don't really know who I've not had the chance to work with. So I think it's more brands and sectors that I sort of think of around, where I haven't had the chance to work. I've never worked in booze at all. So I talked about Guinness earlier being a campaign that I've always loved. And I feel like I'd really enjoy that world for, some obvious reasons, but also I just think, it's so brand led, obviously. I feel like there's a sort of purity about that world of marketing that I would enjoy. The other area that really intrigues me, I'd love to work on as a consultant if I get the chance, is in cars. Okay. That sort of whole sector. I think, a lot of the advertising today is very ordinary and lacks, distinctiveness. But, you think back to the famous, campaigns for Audi or for VW and stuff. I think bringing back a little bit of that just great marketing kind of craftsmanship into that sector would be a really interesting challenge.
I maybe tied to this, but is there a campaign that you look at? We've talked about a lot of campaigns that you have done yourself and also admired, but is there anyone you go, this is just one of the best I've ever seen?
It's probably a bit of a recency sort of effect here, but I think I've mentioned to you, Conor, but I really like the Uncensored CMO podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Like John Evans from System One. And he recently interviewed a guy called Dominic Dwight, who's the marketing director for Yorkshire Tea. And I know Dom through Lucky General's advertising agency. So Lucky Generals do the advertising, and that's how I've met Dom. I've worked with him and his team. But I really do feel like that Yorkshire Tea campaign around sort of done proper, I think is what they call it. It's just absolutely beautifully done. And I really urge anyone to take a listen to that interview between John and Dom, because it's like a masterclass in how to build a brand. So lots of the principles that we've talked around, fresh consistency, penetration-led growth, it's sort of all beautifully kind of comes together in that little case study. And interestingly, when I was at Unilever, I was working on PG Tips and desperately trying to work out how to fix it, because it's quite a broken brand. And all the time I could just see this Yorkshire Tea brand kind of smoothly kind of sailing past us and gaining share week on week. And I think it's a really quite humble example, but it's a really lovely example of classic kind of brand building, I think.
So we're at the end, and I thought it'd be nice maybe to ask you to give us kind of a top 3 countdown of, advice or tips you'd have for people in marketing, whether they're starting out or kind of further on in their career, kind of. And we've talked about some of the things you've learned along the way, but it'd be great to get your kind of top 3 tips.
Yes. Yeah, you have warned me with this. I had kind of thought about it beforehand. So shall I start with number 3?
Go with number 3. Yeah, we'll go 3 to 1.
So my number 3 is don't be afraid of the numbers. So I've always sort of prided myself on being quite a commercial marketeer, and been really familiar with the P&L and the balance sheet, and just sort of being recognised as somebody who's there not to just sort of grow the brand and kind of brand equity, but really to grow the kind of the business. So I right back in my PepsiCo days, the business was run by a brilliant guy called Martin Glenn. And Martin was like really encouraged marketeers to be like mini managing directors for your brand. And I think there's a real truth in that. And I think as the marketing discipline kind of fragments a bit, that skill has started to sort of disappear a bit. Those marketeers as mini brand managing director, I think, is really important. So that was tip number 3. Don't be afraid of the numbers. And the next one is, so that's number 2, is to pick environments that really work for you. I remember once I interviewed for a job, and it was through one of those sort of independent agencies that kind of give you some deep kind of sort of psychology-based kind of interview. And the guy sort of looked over his glasses at me at the end and said, I think you'd be very good for this job, but you do like a following wind, don't you? And at the time I was like, I don't really quite know what you mean. And I reflected on it. It's like, of course I bloody do. Why ever join a company where you've got like a headwind constantly blowing against you? And so I think, pick environments which are favorable environments where you can do great stuff in. Otherwise, so much of your energy will be spent fighting battles rather than just getting on and doing the job. Yeah. And I think going with that is having the ability to say no. I interviewed once for my absolute dream job. Amazing company, amazing brand. And the final interview was with the chief exec. He was an hour late for the interview. He gave me 20 minutes because he was about to jump on a motorbike to go off, to a meeting somewhere. And right at the end, literally as he's putting the motorbike helmet on, he said, you've got one question. So I said, well, how would you describe the culture in this company in one word? And he said, relentless. And then he literally put his motorbike helmet on. He jumped on the back of the motorbike and he was shot off somewhere. And I was like, seriously, do I want to work somewhere that's relentless? That's just, why would I ever do that? And they like me. They wanted to hire me. And I turned them down. I said, I just can't work in that environment. It just sounds awful. So that was number 2. And number 1, hopefully it's a theme that's run all the way through our chat, is is do remarkable stuff. Just do things, purple cow marketing, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Just do stuff that's going to break through the crowd and take absolute pride in it. It's that simple. I really think it is.
You need to have the other two to do the first, I think. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be able to say no. Like, I think that's
it's
it.
True. You need the credibility that comes with being commercial. You need to be in an environment where people are really backing you. And only then, I think, can you truly do remarkable stuff. So I think you're absolutely right. I think they work together.
Yeah. And as is proven, I think, through your career, and, you have done it, right? You've done remarkable work. So listen, Jon, thank you so much for taking so much of your time to chat today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Every time we talk, I learn a bit more. I obsess about reading the Brand Gym blog, and encourage anybody who isn't signed up to it to sign up to the alerts and read the blog, and of course read the books that have been written by the Brand Gym as well. So Jon, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Conor. Really enjoyed it.
Well, I did say at the start you were in for a treat. Jon speaks with such passion about the brands he has worked on. My shopping list now includes Stork, tangy cheese Doritos, and fish tacos. I'm not sure what you took away from this, but for me, Jon reminded me to be proud of and love the things I'm working on, to work with great people at a place where I can do great things, and that it's possible to be analytical and be able to appreciate creativity. It's whole brain marketing. And finally, do things that are remarkable. So that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening to That's What I Call Marketing. If you did enjoy it, please do share and add comments with your feedback. From me, Conor Byrne, until the next episode, take care.